Good morning to Vienna and good afternoon to Hong Kong. Hello, Kay.
Hello, Lucas. Nice to be here.
And may I ask you to introduce you briefly, who you are and what your background is?
Yes, my name is Kay Ross. I'm, born in Scotland, grew up in Australia from the age of 3, so you can maybe hear my Australian accent. And I've lived in Hong Kong for 27 years, and I wear several hats. I'm an improviser. I perform with an English language improv troupe here in Hong Kong called People's Liberation Improv. And I'm an applied improvisation trainer, facilitator. I'm also marketing consultant, copywriter, editor, and I'm also passionate about personal development and healing. So I combine all of those things, and I have a project called The Playground of Possibilities. And the common thread in all of that is storytelling.
Now that sounds great. So how did you learn to improvise and to apply it in different fields?
Well, I've been acting since I was a teenager. So I was a member of a youth theatre group, and I had a little bit of exposure learning about improv there. And then I studied drama in the first year of my BA degree, majoring in French at Adelaide University. And then I performed in lots of theatre, amateur theatre, musical theatre, singing in choirs for many years in Australia and here in Hong Kong. And then in about 2007, 2008, I started performing stand-up comedy for a while at a comedy club here in Hong Kong. And then during that time, I performed there for about 4 years, almost every week. And during that time, I met some people who had set up an improv troupe here, People's Liberation Improv, and they invited me to their rehearsals, which I really liked, and eventually they invited me to join the troupe. So I've been a member of that for about 12 years now, 13 years now. And when I first started attending rehearsals and performing with People's Liberation Improv, I very quickly realised that the principles and mindset of what we were doing together on stage without a script were actually useful off stage in my life and my business, because I'm self-employed. And then, doing some searching online, I discovered that there were lots of other people around the world who'd already had the same thought as me, long before me. And I discovered this concept called applied improvisation and the organisation, the Applied Improvisation Network. So since then, I've been a very active member of that group and attended several conferences, including one in Berlin and one in Montreal, and regional conferences in Melbourne and Manila, where I met Gabe Mercado. So I've been very active with the applied improvisation community ever since and become an evangelist for the cause.
Well, that sounds great. And I remembered when we were talking that we already performed together in Berlin on stage in some little scenes. That's why I thought, like, I know you, but where from? So that was so interesting.
A long time ago, yes.
Yeah. And but I haven't ever been to Hong Kong. So how is life there, and how do people improvise there? Because, you know, from the media, we hear that there's a lot of societal changes, so how does improvisation apply to this societal change, or how can we use it there?
Well, it's not very well known here. There's a small improv community here. There's a few teams, but of course there hasn't been much performance in the past year. And even before that, in late 2019, before COVID, we had 6 months of violent political protests on the streets of Hong Kong, which closed down a lot of activities and events. the concept of applied improvisation is really not known here much at all. Well, even improv, a lot of people don't know what improv is, or they think it's the same as stand-up comedy, which it's not. But with applied improvisation, yes, when I talk to, for instance, HR managers, maybe they've never heard of it, or they have a misconception of what it is, and maybe they feel it's a bit risky for their company to hire an applied improvisation facilitator because they've never heard of it. It's new to them. Yeah.
So how do you explain them what improvisation is, and how it could help them in, the personal life, the business life, in organization, or even in their society?
When I approach a potential client, I don't go to them and say, hey, do you want to have an improv workshop? Because they don't know what that means, or they have an inaccurate perception of it. So I find it's more useful to talk about it in terms of what's meaningful to them, what issues or problems or challenges they're facing in their company, their organization, and how the principles and mindset of improvisation, theatrical improvisation, how taking that off stage, borrowing those principles and using them in daily life and work will help them to deal with their challenges. So for example, if a client wants a workshop about teamwork or leadership or communication or creativity or innovation or emotional intelligence or selling or how to handle change and uncertainty and risk and failure and mistakes, I can explain to them how the improv principles and mindset can help people to deal with those topics, those issues. Yeah.
So what are your arguments? Because a leader could say, yes, we're interested in like creativity, innovation, and change. And there are many workshops out there and different methods and models. So what is the difference if you use methods from improvisation?
Because it's not a PowerPoint lecture. It's people actually getting up out of their chairs and moving around and doing stuff, interacting with each other, exercising all the muscles of improvisation, and it's fun. I mean, it can be fun. It's not, the aim is not necessarily to be funny. It's not to be funny, but it can certainly be fun, and so that builds team bonding and energy and engagement. The purpose is not necessarily to be funny. It's to practice and have a physical experience of improvising, of doing something in a team together without a script, which is life and business. We don't have a script. And what I like about applied improvisation workshops as well is that we don't need a lot of fancy equipment. We can use an empty room and improvise, do some improvisational exercises, cooperative improvisational exercises. It's not about competition. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite exercise when you say like, if there's an empty room and let's say 10 or 20 people, there's the one exercise that I like most because, it's energizing, or it's moving, or it's changing. Is there something that you really like?
One that I tend to use in every workshop, regardless of the particular issue or topic that the client asks me to deal with, is really the foundational exercise of improvisation, which is yes and, which I know you've covered in some of your sessions before. I find if we do nothing else, if they take away that one exercise, that one new way of behaving and thinking, they'll get lots of benefit from it.
So what does yes and mean to you?
Well, it is the number one foundational principle of improvisation. And there's a gazillion books and TEDx talks and podcasts about that. The way we explain it in improv, and it's improv jargon, it means yes and, it's the way we approach any situation or any scene that we're in with a scene partner on stage. And it means, the yes part of it means, I accept what you're saying, I'm willing to hear what you're saying, I'm willing to explore it for a while. And the and part means then you build on what the partner says. So your scene partner says something to you. In an improv scene, you must accept that it's the reality of what's happening in front of you right here and right now. So you go with the flow, you go with it, and you add to it. In life off stage, life and business off stage, it doesn't mean you have to like or agree with what the person said. It means that you're at least willing to hear them. You don't immediately block them with a yes, but, or a no. It means you're willing to explore the idea a little bit further, to ask questions. It doesn't mean you're committing to implementing what they've suggested. It means you're just open and tolerant and willing to listen to somebody's ideas or a different perspective, and then you build on it. And I find that kind of yes and mentality, you don't have to say the words yes and literally. It's more of a mentality of how you approach life, how I approach life, of approaching things where I find it even difficult to say the word but in my mouth. I tend to approach life with a yes and mentality. Now, that doesn't mean that if a friend of mine said, hey, let's jump out of a plane without a parachute, I'm going to say yes. No, of course not. In life and in business, of course, sometimes you have to say no for very valid reasons. And sometimes people say no for not so valid reasons. And I just find that in general, not always, but in general, life flows better when I approach things with a yes and mentality.
So after such a workshop in, let's say, in a company or in a training session, and perhaps people, better understand or experience the yes and mentality in others, what do you think will change in their professional life or the daily life after, experiencing some of these improvisational exercises and mindsets?
Well, just approaching life and business with that yes and mentality will, I think, create some significant changes just in the way people operate and function in their day-to-day lives, in the way they relate to other people, in the way they come up with ideas and discuss ideas, in the way they run their staff meetings at work, in the way they implement ideas. Just that alone will be significant. And then other principles or concepts of improv are about being present in the moment, being mindful. It's a very mindful thing. It's not just random chaos doing whatever you want. These principles actually give it some structure within which there's freedom, but you need the structure. So being present and mindful in the moment, because in improv you have to listen very carefully to what the other players are saying and noticing what they're doing, because you don't have a script. You have to learn to listen very, very carefully. Another one of the improv principles is make your teammates look good. Make your teammates look good, because it's not about you or me being the star of the show. It's a team sport. We rely on each other. We depend on each other, again, because there is no script. And what I like about that idea is that if I'm doing my best to make my teammates look good, not taking all the credit for myself, but making them look good, I'm also trusting that they're doing the same for me. And I find operating with that kind of mentality with a group of people just makes things flow better, work better, operate better. People treat each other better with more respect and tolerance and kindness and fun. Yeah. And then what else is there? Just trusting your intuition, trusting that first impulse, not just from your mind, but from your whole body. It's a whole body activity. And then probably one of the most challenging sometimes ones to implement is the idea of getting comfortable with change and uncertainty and risk and failure and mistakes, because they happen in business. If you're experimenting with researching a new product or service, there's going to be mistakes. Not every experiment works out the first time. So I find in life and business, it's very helpful to get comfortable with the idea of change and experimentation and risk. It's not about celebrating failure. It's about, I see it as celebrating the willingness and the courage to step up and have a go, even if there's a risk that it might not work out the way you expected and planned. Yeah.
What I liked when I wrote an email, like, are you interested in teaching? And I think an hour ago later you say yes, and then you just had some more specific questions. So
Yeah.
I think that there's some positive changes or opportunities in life, and well, when life is you know is good to you, I think it's easier to say yes and to let your partner shine and to be positive and so on. And you already started to say, like, well, it's not, change is not always a good thing, and perhaps there's uncertainty, and maybe there's some like really even critical situations or societal changes. I mean, I guess in Hong Kong, not every day is easy. There's a lot going on, and it's really hard to say yes and say I listen to the other opinions and so on. So how do you approach all these principles in situations that matters, and they're not that easy, for example, in regards to societal changes?
Well, talking about risk and change, I like to look not just at what you might call the negative things. Let's open up our mind to the possibility. Let's think also about, wow, what are all the positive possibilities that might happen? Because the way I view the world, the universe, is that the universe is constantly offering us adventures, challenges, opportunities. That's why I came up with my concept that I call the playground of possibilities, because life is a playground of possibilities and an improvisation game. So yeah, let's think about the positive possibilities as well.